The ribbon was still perfectly tied when I handed the box of birthday chocolates to my daughter-in-law. Still, she smiled too quickly, that tight kind of smile people wear when they've already opened the gift. As I walked back to the kitchen, I noticed the seal on the bottom was sliced clean. While her laughter echoed behind me, a bitter almond scent clung to the air. The same box my son mailed with love had already told me who got to it first. That's when I knew. Next year, I'm keeping the gift and losing the middleman. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The doorbell chimed just as the afternoon sun slid across the living room carpet, turning the beige fibers gold. Patricia Myers wiped her hands on a dish towel and shuffled toward the front door, expecting maybe a neighbor's misplaced package or one of those charity flyers wedged awkwardly against the frame. Instead, a small cardboard box sat on the welcome mat, its shipping label printed with her son's name in that rushed, half-finished handwriting he'd had since high school. She felt her chest warm, soft, hopeful, almost shy. David remembered. She carried the package inside, setting it gently on her kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator's low hum. For a moment she stood there, fingertips resting on the box, savoring what she wanted to believe the moment meant. Then she reached for the scissors. Before she even cut the tape, she heard footsteps upstairs. Tara's voice floated down, that familiar, sharp-edged tone she used when she'd just finished a call and wanted everyone to know how busy she was. "What's that?" Tara appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, manicured nails tapping her elbows. Lily trailed behind her, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, hair slightly mussed from studying on her bed. Pat gave a small smile. "Package from David." Tara walked over with an amused smirk, as if already bored with the idea. "He finally bought you something?" She leaned in. "Well, go on. What is it?" Pat opened the box carefully. Inside sat a cheap grocery store assortment of chocolates, the kind sold near the checkout lanes in bulk, wrapped in shiny foil that never fully hid their low quality. No card. Not even a folded receipt with a scribbled note. Tara laughed, a short, dismissive burst. "Oh my God, he should have bought those for me. You don't even like sweets." Pat blinked once, fast, covering the sting with a soft smile. "You're right," she said gently, turning the box toward Tara. "Here." Tara snatched it before Pat even finished the gesture, triumphant, like a child catching a prize. "Finally," she said, cracking the lid open. "Something decent in this house." Lily shifted her weight, eyes flicking to her grandmother. Pat caught the glance, worried, sympathetic, quiet. She gave Lily a reassuring nod, as if to say, "It's fine, honey." Really. But it wasn't fine. Not entirely. Tara plucked a chocolate from the tray and popped it into her mouth. See? This is why he buys these things. Well, bought. Past tense. She nudged the tray toward Lily without offering anything. "Don't touch. I'm saving these." Lily's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Pat smoothed the tablecloth with her palm, grounding herself. "I'm glad you like them." "Oh, I do," Tara said, already reaching for another piece. "You probably wouldn't have appreciated them anyway." Pat let her expression remain peaceful, though something inside her had shifted. Small, almost imperceptible. Like the first crack in winter ice. After a few minutes of forced chatter and Tara's satisfied sampling, they drifted upstairs again. Tara bragging about finally getting something decent. And Lily trailing behind, still glancing back at her grandmother with apology in her eyes. When the house fell quiet again, Pat went to the living room, set her cup of tea on the side table, and sank slowly into her armchair. She picked up her phone, intending only to text a polite thank you to David. Something brief, nothing too warm, nothing that might make him feel guilty. But when she unlocked the screen, her banking app notification blinked at the top. Recent activity posted. She hesitated, then tapped it. A small list appeared. Gas station, grocery store, and then $14.99. Hillside Market, chocolates. Her breath stilled. Not in shock. Not in pain, exactly. More like confirmation of a truth she had spent years carefully stepping around. Even the gestures meant for her came from her own pocket. She stared at the transaction for a long moment, the glow of the screen soft against her glasses. Her tea cooled beside her, untouched. Outside, a wind chime clinked on her porch. Light, delicate, almost mocking. Slowly, she set the phone down. Then her eyes narrowed and her fingers tightened on the armrest. Just a fraction. A thought, sharp and sudden, crossed her mind. If he used her money for this, what else had he used it for? And for the first time in a very long time, Patricia Myers felt something other than politeness rise inside her. Something steady, something quiet, something that changed everything. She reached for her laptop. The printer hummed in the quiet of the early morning, spitting out sheet after sheet of thin white paper. Patricia stood beside it, arms folded loosely, watching each page slide onto the tray. She hadn't meant to print everything, not at first. She'd only wanted the one line, the one charge that had made her stomach drop. But once she opened the full statement on her laptop, once she saw the pattern, once she realized the chocolates were only the latest insult, her hands had moved without thinking. Click. Print. The machine beeped softly, signaling it was finished. Pat gathered the papers carefully, lining the edges with a precision born from years sorting mail in tidy stacks. She carried them to the kitchen table and sat, smoothing the top page with her fingertips. The numbers stared back at her in neat columns, unemotional, undeniable. She didn't hear Joan's knock at first. It wasn't until the door creaked open and a familiar voice called, "Pat, you up?" that she blinked out of her trance. "In here," she answered. Joan stepped inside, a gust of cold air following her. She wore her usual quilted vest and carried a reusable grocery bag filled with muffins she'd accidentally baked too many of. But her expression shifted the moment she caught sight of Pat, shoulders slightly hunched, glasses low on her nose, a stack of bank papers in front of her like a barricade. "What happened?" Joan asked softly, all jovial energy gone. She pulled out a chair and sat beside her friend, leaning in with accountant-like focus. Pat didn't speak at first. She simply tapped the page with one finger. Joan slid it closer. Her eyes skimmed down the recent charges: gas, small groceries, the $14.99 chocolate purchase. Her brow knit. "Oh, sweetheart," she exhaled. "He didn't." Pat didn't cry. She didn't even look away. "I thought maybe it was just a mistake." Joan shook her head firmly. "This isn't a mistake. This is a pattern." She flipped to the next page, then the next, scanning months at a time. "These aren't your purchases. I know how you spend. You've always been careful." Pat tightened her hands in her lap. It felt wrong to look too closely before, like I was accusing him. "You're not accusing," Joan said, voice steady. "You're uncovering." Pat swallowed. "He used my money to buy me that gift." "No," Joan corrected gently. "He used your money to pretend he bought you a gift." The words sat between them like something heavy and cold. Pat's throat tightened, not with grief, but with an old, familiar ache she hadn't named in years. Joan opened her purse and pulled out a yellow highlighter, popping the cap with a snap that echoed in the quiet room. "Let's start marking every withdrawal that isn't yours." Pat hesitated, but only for a breath. Then she nodded. Together they combed through the statements line by line. Highlighted marks bloomed across the pages like warning signs. Online orders Pat never made. restaurant charges she didn't recognize, small transfers that had no explanation at all. Each stroke of the marker made her pulse thrum harder. At one point, Joan paused. "Pat, this goes back years." "I know." Pat's voice was steady in a way she didn't expect. A silence settled over them, close, heavy, but shared. Joan squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, this isn't a gift. It's manipulation, and it's financial exploitation." The word made Pat's chest tighten. She looked down at her hands, small, careful, wrinkled with time, and wondered how long she'd been allowing herself to believe that politeness protected her from truth. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. A new text. "Tara." Pat picked it up slowly, dread rising like a slow tide. "Tara. Thanks for the chocolates." Joan leaned over, reading it too, her jaw clenched. Of course she did. Pat stared at the message, at the smirking emoji, at the smugness in each casual word. The highlighted papers sat beneath her hands, glowing yellow like warning lights she could no longer ignore. Something shifted inside her, quiet but powerful. The same feeling she'd had last night, stronger now, clearer. She locked her phone, set it down, straightened her back. "Joan," she said, voice low but unwavering. "I think it's time I talk to someone who can help me properly." Joan's eyes sharpened with understanding. "I know just the person." Pat nodded once. "Good, because I'm done pretending this is nothing." The camera of her mind zoomed in on the stack of highlighted statements. Evidence lined up like dominoes, ready to fall. Downtown Columbus was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that felt like the city was holding its breath. Pat sat in the passenger seat of Joan's sedan, hands folded tightly in her lap, the folder of highlighted bank statements pressed against her knees. She'd barely slept, but her mind felt sharp. Too sharp, like the edges of everything had suddenly become visible. Joan parallel parked with the precision of someone who'd spent decades managing numbers down to the penny. "He's good, Pat," she said, nodding toward the office building across the street. "And he's the kind of man who doesn't let things slide." Pat nodded slowly. I don't want to cause trouble." Joan snorted, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Trouble already came knocking. You're just answering the door." Inside, the lobby was warm and carpeted, with quiet classical music playing overhead. The receptionist greeted them with a polite smile and ushered them into a small conference room with glass walls and a single, thick wooden table that looked too sturdy to ever shift. Pat set the folder down carefully. A moment later, the door opened, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped inside. He wasn't intimidating, just steady. A calm presence who moved without wasted motion. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Myers, I'm Henry Collins." Pat shook it, her palm cool against his warm grip. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course." He gestured for them to sit. "Joan filled me in very briefly, but I'd like to hear everything in your words, and we'll take our time." Pat's throat tightened. She'd spent her life avoiding scenes, smoothing conflict, choosing softness. Speaking up, even to someone meant to help, felt like removing a bandage she'd been wearing for decades. Still, she opened the folder. "I found this yesterday," she began, voice steady but quiet. "The chocolates my son gave me, he used my money to buy them." Henry didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, inviting her to continue. Pat slid the first page toward him, the yellow highlights glowing like bruises across the white paper. "And then I saw the other transactions, ones I didn't make. Ones I didn't recognize." Henry adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. He read slowly, methodically, his brows knit. He flipped the page, then another, then another. The silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. It was a silence that worked. When he finally looked up, his expression was different, firmer, edged with concern. Mrs. Myers, has your son used your accounts like this before? The question hit with a weight that made Pat's breath catch. She clasped her hands together, fingers nodding instinctively. Yes, she whispered. For years, I think. I didn't always notice. Sometimes it was little things. A gift he said he bought. A dinner he said he covered. But the charges always seemed familiar, small. She swallowed hard. It felt unkind to question it. Henry's jaw tightened, but not unkindly. May I ask, did he ever ask your permission to use your accounts? Or explain the charges afterward? No, Pat said softly. He always made it sound like he was doing something generous. I didn't want to embarrass him by tracking things. Joan placed a reassuring hand on Pat's arm. Henry set the papers down, folding his hands over them. Mrs. Myers, what you're describing isn't simple irresponsibility. This is a form of financial exploitation. It's more common than people realize, especially for older adults. It often starts small, exactly like this, and grows because the person trusts the one misusing their resources. Pat's breath trembled. She stared at the papers, a dozen yellow streaks glowing like warning lights. I didn't want to think my own son would hurt me. Henry softened his tone. Wanting to see the best in someone is not a weakness, but ignoring harm when it's clearly documented, that would be. Pat absorbed that. The words felt blunt, but they didn't hurt. They felt clarifying. Henry tapped the folder gently. You did the right thing coming here. These records give us a clear starting point. I can help you protect your finances, your accounts, and your future. Pat lifted her gaze, her eyes steadier than she expected. I don't want to punish him, she said quietly. I just want control of my own life back. Henry nodded with gravity. And that's exactly what we'll do. The room felt warmer suddenly, less like a place where problems were dissected and more like a place where solutions lived. But then Pat's phone buzzed. She didn't want to look. Not here. Not now. Joan leaned slightly toward her. It's okay, Pat. Just check. Pat flipped the phone over. A new message from David. Short, sharp, ominous. Mom, why are the accounts acting weird? Call me ASAP. Her heartbeat quickened. Slow, heavy thuds that reverberated through her chest. Henry watched her expression change. Is that him? Pat nodded, setting the phone face down with deliberate care. The tremor in her hand wasn't fear this time. It was something colder, something firmer. Mr. Collins, she said, voice quiet but resolute. What happens next? The next morning carried a different kind of quiet. Brighter, clearer, like the air after a storm decides it's finally done. Pat stood at the teller desk inside the local Columbus bank, Joan at her left, Henry at her right. She felt strangely small between them, but not weak, more like she was standing in the center of a protective triangle she'd never realized she needed. The teller, a young woman with soft brown curls and a name tag that read, Maddie, tapped at her keyboard. So you'd like to remove your son's access to the joint account, correct? Pat swallowed. Her fingers brushed the edges of her folder, papers neatly stacked, highlighted lines tucked away like evidence waiting its turn. Yes, she said quietly. Effective immediately. Maddie nodded with gentle professionalism. We can do that for you. Please give me just a moment to finalize the change. Pat exhaled, long and steady. Joan squeezed her shoulder. Henry stood with his arms loosely crossed, watching the screen with the sharp eye of someone who knew exactly what mattered and what didn't. When Maddie returned with a final signature page, Pat signed with a steady hand. David Myers will have no further access, the teller confirmed. The account is now solely in your name. It should have felt terrifying. It didn't. It felt like air. Back in Henry's office, sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, warming the conference table where a new stack of forms waited. Henry explained each one patiently: new checking, new savings, fraud alerts, digital locks, paperless statements routed only to Pat. "We'll start fresh," he said. "Completely clean, completely protected." Pat nodded, absorbing each word with a quiet attentiveness she hadn't felt in years. She initialed pages, signed lines, and confirmed that yes, she wanted full online security. When the last document was done, Henry gathered everything into a crisp folder. "You'll receive new cards in the mail," he said. "These accounts are yours alone, no shared access of any kind." A small smile tugged at Pat's lips. "Thank you, Mr. Collins." "Henry," he corrected softly. "And you're welcome." Joan let out a breath she'd apparently been holding. "Well, look at that. A clean slate." She reached into her huge purse and pulled out a brand new binder, navy blue, sturdy, with a label already printed on the front. "Pat's Future." Pat blinked, touched. "Joan, you didn't need to—" "Oh, please." Joan waved a hand. "If I don't organize your life, who will?" She opened the binder and began sliding Henry's papers into color-coded sections. "Finances," she announced, snapping the first divider into place. "Accounts, passwords, and this section," she tapped an empty tab, "is for anything else we catch them doing." Despite everything, Pat let out a small, warm laugh. "You think we'll need an entire section?" "Honey," Joan said, raising a brow, "we may need two." That afternoon, Pat returned home feeling strangely taller in her own living room. She set her purse down, placed the binder on the table, and brewed herself a fresh cup of tea. The steam curled up gently, wrapping her in a warmth that didn't feel like resignation this time. It felt like beginning. A soft knock made her glance toward the entryway. "Grandma." Lily peeked in, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom said I could stop by before dinner." Pat's face softened instantly. "Come in, sweetheart." Lily entered and looked her over, head tilted as if analyzing some invisible change. "You look lighter," she said quietly. "Like something's different." Pat paused, surprised that Lily noticed before anyone else. "Maybe I'm just breathing a little easier today." Lily smiled, a small, knowing one, and hugged her. "Good?" They sat together for a few minutes, Lily sketching idly while Pat watched the afternoon light turn soft across the kitchen floor. But the peace lasted only until Pat's phone lit up. David calling. The name stabbed through the quiet. Pat stared at it. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She reached for the phone and answered with a calmness that surprised even her. "Mom?" David's voice was sharp, halfway between irritation and accusation. "Why was a transaction denied? What's going on with the accounts?" Pat's gaze drifted to the binder on the table. Blue. Solid. Certain. "I'm making changes," she said simply. A beat of silence. David inhaled sharply, as if preparing a familiar argument, but Pat didn't give him the chance. "I'll call you later," she added, voice steady, and ended the call before he could respond. Lily looked up from her sketchbook, eyes wide. "Everything okay?" Pat placed the phone down gently, her heartbeat calm, anchored. "For the first time in a long while," she said. "Yes." But the phone buzzed again. David calling a second time, more insistent, more frantic. Pat didn't answer. She met Lily's eyes, and in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. A bond tightening, a truth rising. And just as Pat reached to silence the phone altogether, a new text appeared from an unknown number. Direct, cold, and unmistakably connected to the storm she'd just stepped into. "We need to talk. Now." Pat didn't reply to the unknown text. Instead, she powered the phone off completely, set it beside the binder Joan had assembled, and let the house settle around her. The quiet wasn't peaceful this time, more like the moment a lake goes perfectly still before something breaks the surface. By morning, she knew exactly where she needed to be. Henry's office was busier than usual, phones ringing behind closed doors, printers humming somewhere down the hallway. But when he saw Pat and Joan step in together, he gave a small, reassuring nod, as if he'd expected her. "Come on back," he said, motioning toward the conference room. Pat sat, binder in her lap like a shield she no longer feared to hold. Joan settled next to her, arms crossed but eyes sharp, guarding the perimeter. Henry closed the door behind him and took a seat. The seriousness in his posture was unmistakable. "Mrs. Myers," he began carefully, "I received a notification this morning from the fraud prevention service we set up yesterday." Pat's pulse flickered. Joan leaned in, already bracing. Henry continued, sliding a printed report across the table. "Someone attempted to connect your old debit card to an online shopping account, a large retailer." Pat didn't blink. She didn't breathe. The room dimmed around the edges. "Who?" she asked, softly but with a gravity Henry didn't miss. He tapped a line on the report. "The system logs an approximate device location and name. It was attempted from your son's home." He paused. "But the system also flagged the user profile. The first name listed on the shopping account was Tara." The air left Pat's lungs like she'd been quietly punched. "Tara. Yesterday. Smirking at the chocolates. Last night. Sending that mocking thanks. And now this." Joan's mouth tightened. "That woman is unbelievable." Pat stared at the paper. Her expression didn't crumble. Not quite. But something inside her stilled the way a pond freezes after a sudden cold snap. Her hands folded together in her lap. Perfectly calm. Perfectly still. Henry kept his voice gentle but direct. "This qualifies as attempted unauthorized access. She tried to link your card as if it belonged to her. That is a serious boundary breach, and it confirms your accounts were never safe with them." For a long moment, Pat didn't speak. The weight of the revelation pressed down, spreading through her in a cold, controlled wave. It wasn't shock. She was past shock. It was recognition. A truth that had been whispering for years now stood in front of her, unmistakable and loud. "They didn't stop," she murmured. "Not even after losing access. Not even after the denial." She looked up at Henry. "They thought I wouldn't know." Henry nodded once. "Most people in your situation never see the alerts because they don't have protections. You do. And this attempt gives us an opportunity to go further." "Further?" Joan echoed. Henry turned to a new set of documents resting beside him, papers with bold headers and legal margins. "Mrs. Myers, right now your son still holds power of attorney privileges from years ago. It was a simple document then, standard, harmless. But today, with what you've discovered, with the pattern of financial behavior," his voice softened, "leaving that authority in place puts you at continued risk." Pat's spine went straight, every inch of her signaling a readiness she hadn't felt in decades. "What do I need to do?" Henry slid the papers toward her. "We revoke his power of attorney and assign a new one, someone you trust, someone who will protect what belongs to you." Pat's hand hovered for only a second. "Not David. Not Tara. Not anymore." She looked to Joan. Joan's eyes went wide. "Me? Pat, only if you want—" "I do," Pat said, voice clear. "There isn't anyone else I trust more with my future." Joan swallowed hard, fighting the emotion rising in her. "Then I'll do it. Gladly." Henry began guiding them page by page, explaining each clause. Pat read everything, slowly, intentionally, leaving nothing to chance. And when she signed, her signature didn't tremble. It was bold. It was steady. It was an ending and a beginning. When the final document was complete, Joan reached across the table, grabbed Pat's hands, and pulled her into a fierce hug. Pat stiffened for a moment, surprised, but then she melted into it, her chin against Joan's shoulder. "You're not alone," Joan whispered. "Not one single step of this." Pat nodded, eyes closed, breathing in the comfort and strength she'd always been too polite to ask for. But as Henry gathered the documents, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his brow deepening. "Mrs. Myers," he said slowly, "there's been another alert." Pat lifted her head, pulse tightening. Henry met her eyes with quiet seriousness. Someone tried accessing the old account again, this time far more aggressively. Henry's words, "far more aggressively," echoed long after he'd explained the alert. Someone had tried to force a login through repeated password resets, then attempted security question guesses. It was sloppy, frantic, and desperate. Pat had listened quietly, her face composed, her heartbeat slow and steady. For weeks, months, maybe years, she had been afraid of confrontation. But now, she wanted clarity, documentation, protection, and she wanted it written into the bones of her future. So when Henry asked if she felt ready to take the next step, she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Let's finish this." Henry returned with a thin stack of documents, printed on crisp legal paper, tabs neatly marking sections. At the top, in bold letters, "Last Will and Testament of Patricia Ann Myers." Pat stared at the title longer than she expected. It wasn't frightening. It felt factual, like laying bricks on a foundation she should have rebuilt years ago. Henry sat across from her, calm and measured. "This formalizes everything. Once signed and notarized, it overrides all previous versions of your will." Joan nudged her gently. "You ready?" Pat inhaled softly. "More than ready." Henry pointed to the relevant clauses. "Per your request, David Myers and Tara Myers are removed entirely as beneficiaries. There's no ambiguity or loophole. They inherit nothing." Pat didn't flinch. She just nodded. "Good." "And," Henry continued, "Lily Myers is named as your sole primary heir." At that, Pat's expression softened, not with hesitancy, but with genuine warmth. "She's the only one who has ever treated me with sincerity." Joan squeezed her hand. "She adores you, Pat. You know that." Pat smiled, small but certain. Henry turned another page. "Because Lily is still a minor, I've drafted a trust to govern how and when she receives the inheritance. You can specify educational funds, living expenses, and age-based distributions." "Education," Pat said immediately. "I want her to never have to worry about paying for school. She's so bright. She deserves every opportunity." Henry nodded. "Then we'll structure it that way." He wrote a few notes, quick, practiced strokes of his pen. "We'll also include protections against interference from her parents." Joan scoffed. "Good idea. Lord knows those two would try to get their hands on anything they could." Pat didn't disagree. Henry continued walking her through each page. Durable clauses, executor selection, guardianship considerations, clear, airtight language leaving no room for reinterpretation. Pat read every line. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel overwhelmed by legal text. She felt anchored by it. When Henry slid the signature page across the table, Pat reached for the pen with deliberate calm. Her script flowed across the paper. Beautiful, steady, final. "It's done," Henry said. Pat exhaled, the release quiet but profound. They left the office mid-afternoon. Joan insisted on a victory muffin from the bakery down the street, because new wills need carbs. But Pat's phone buzzed before they even made it out of the parking lot. She glanced down. Tara calling. Joan groaned. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Pat answered, lifting the phone slowly to her ear. What did you do? Tara spat before Pat could even say hello. David just told me money is missing. Something's wrong with the accounts and the bank isn't telling us anything. Pat watched a leaf skid across the pavement in the mild wind. Her own voice came out calm, composed, and surprisingly steady. I'm making some changes, she said. Changes? Tara snapped. What does that even mean? We can't access anything. Pat held the phone a little farther from her ear. Joan glared at it like she could scorch Tara through the receiver. I'll explain soon, Pat said, her words almost tender, but not apologetic. Not anymore. Patricia, don't you dare. Pat ended the call. Her hand trembled, just once, not with fear, with release. Joan murmured, Good girl, and looped her arm through Pat's as they began walking toward the car. But before Pat could take another step, her phone chimed again. This time a text, not a call. From David. Short. Direct. Ominous. We need to talk. Today, I'm coming over. Pat stared at the message. Joan leaned over her shoulder. Oh, hell, Joan muttered. Here it comes. Pat slipped the phone into her purse, lifted her chin, and breathed in the cool autumn air. I'm ready, she whispered. Henry's office smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee when Pat walked in the next morning. Joan at her side like a one-woman security detail. The sky outside was overcast, the kind of dim gray that made the overhead lights seem softer. Pat didn't feel tired, though. She felt aligned, as if every step she'd taken over the past few days had finally settled into place. Henry greeted them with that same steady calm she'd come to rely on. Everything is prepared, he said. All that's left are signatures. Pat sat at the conference table and lifted the pen. The air around her felt still, intentional. With each signature, one for the trust, one for the executor designation, one final confirmation of her newly updated will. She felt pieces of herself slide back where they belonged. These weren't just documents. They were boundaries, finally written in ink instead of hopes. Henry gathered the completed pages into a neat stack. From this point forward, he said, Lily is fully protected. The trust is active, and no one can alter your decisions without your explicit consent. Joan grinned proudly. Look at you, Pat, running your life like Fort Knox. Pat laughed, quiet, genuine. Feels strange, she admitted. Strange in a good way. Henry walked them to the elevator, offering a polite nod. If anything else happens, he said, call me right away. Pat didn't need to ask what else meant. She already knew. Outside, Joan steered her toward the small bakery on the corner. Celebration time, she declared. No arguments. Pat didn't resist. The smell of warm sugar and vanilla hit them as soon as they stepped inside. Joan ordered 2 oversized cupcakes with generous swirls of frosting, 1 lemon, 1 vanilla bean, and insisted Pat choose first. They sat by the window, the glass fogging slightly from the ovens behind the counter. Pat peeled the wrapper from her cupcake. The first bite was sweet, soft, unexpectedly comforting. To new beginnings, Joan said, raising hers in a tiny toast. Pat mirrored the gesture. To protecting what matters. Halfway through their cupcakes, Joan's phone buzzed with a news alert. But Pat's vibrated with something more pointed. A message thread had popped up automatically. Bank notifications routed to her alone now. Attempted transaction. Declined card ending in 0832. Insufficient permissions. She knew that card number by memory, not hers. David's. Another ping followed, just seconds later. Attempted transaction. Declined merchant. Ridgeview Electronics. Joan leaned over. Sounds like someone's having an interesting morning. Pat didn't smile exactly, but her lips twitched with something close to satisfaction. It seemed so. By late afternoon, Lily arrived unexpectedly, her backpack hanging low, her hair wind-tossed from walking fast. "Grandma?" she called softly as she stepped inside. Pat looked up from the kitchen table. "I'm here." Lily entered, studying her carefully. "Mom's in a mood," she said after a beat. "And Dad keeps calling the bank. Did something happen?" The innocence in her voice made Pat's heart soften. She reached for Lily's hand, warm and small in her own. "Everything's okay," Pat said gently. "I promise." Lily searched her face as though reading something deeper than words. "You seem stronger." Pat squeezed her hand. "Maybe I finally am." A tiny, relieved smile pulled at Lily's mouth. She rested her forehead against Pat's shoulder, a silent thank you that meant more than any spoken one could. Pat wrapped an arm around her, grounding both of them in a quiet moment of clarity. Lily wasn't just an heir on paper. She was the only person who had ever made Pat feel valued simply for being herself. But the peace didn't last. Pat's phone buzzed again, sharp, angry, insistent. A text from David. "What did you do? Why is my card being declined everywhere? Call me now." A second text followed before she could even exhale. "This isn't funny. Fix it." Lily lifted her head. "Is that Dad?" Pat slid the phone face down, her expression unreadable but steady. "It is." Lily hesitated. "Are you going to call him?" Pat looked at her granddaughter, this quiet, observant girl who'd seen too much and said too little. And she shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "Not yet." Before Lily could ask why, a third text buzzed, shorter, colder. "I'm coming over tonight. We're settling this." Lily's eyes widened, worry surfacing. Pat placed a reassuring hand over hers, but her gaze was distant now, focused, almost razor-sharp. Evening settled over the neighborhood with a quiet heaviness, the kind that made every sound sharper. Pat stood at the kitchen counter slicing apples for Lily, a habit from when she was 5, when comfort was something you could hold in your hands. Lily sat nearby doing homework, though her eyes kept drifting to the front door. They both felt it before it happened. A car pulled up too fast. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps approached the house. Then, bang, bang, bang on the front door. Lily flinched. Pat didn't. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the entryway, opening the door slowly. Tara stood on the porch, breathless, hair frazzled as if she'd run from the driveway. Her expression, a mix of outrage and panic, twisted the porch light's glow across her face. "What is going on?" Tara demanded, pushing past Pat into the living room as if the house belonged to her. "Why isn't David's card working? Why isn't my card working? The bank won't tell us anything." Pat closed the door with measured calm and turned to face her. "Because I ended all joint access," she said. Tara blinked. "What?" "I removed David from my accounts. Fully. Permanently." For a moment, Tara just stared, as if the words didn't make sense in any language she understood. Then her jaw dropped. "You did what?" Pat didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She simply let the truth settle in the air like dust in sunlight. "I ended the arrangement," she repeated. "It was long overdue." "That's ridiculous," Tara snapped. "It's dramatic and unnecessary and completely unfair. You knew we used those accounts for family expenses." "No," Pat said, her voice steady. "You used them for your expenses." Tara's eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting. "This is unbelievable. David said you were confused, but this is insane. Are you trying to embarrass us? Is that it?" Pat's calmness didn't falter. "This isn't about embarrassment. It's about boundaries that should have existed years ago." Tara scoffed, pacing in a tight, frantic circle. "You can't just cut us off. You can't make decisions like this without telling us." Pat lifted her chin. I can. And I did. For a split second, Tara froze. Furious and thrown off balance, a woman suddenly realizing the ground beneath her had shifted. She opened her mouth to launch another tirade. And Pat's phone rang from the kitchen counter. David calling. The sound sliced through the room. Tara lunged toward the phone as if the call were a lifeline. "Put him on speaker," she barked. Pat walked past her, slow and purposeful, and picked up the phone herself. The display glowed bright in the dim kitchen. She answered calmly. "David." His voice came in hot, loud, already spiraling. "Mom, what the hell is happening? Tara says the cards are dead. The bank won't tell us anything. Did something get messed up? Did you go in and—" "I ended your access," Pat said, cutting through his rambling. "All of it." There was a long beat of stunned silence, then an explosion. "You what? Mom, that's not funny. You can't just— Those accounts were how we— I mean, that money—" Pat's voice remained steady. "It's my money, David." Tara shouted toward the phone. "Tell her she can't do this. Tell her she's being manipulated by that nosy neighbor and that lawyer." Pat turned the phone slightly away from Tara but kept her tone even. "No one manipulated me. I made the decision myself." "Mom!" David snapped, anger edging into something harsher. "Fix this. Now." Lily stepped quietly into the doorway at that exact moment, school notebook still in her hand. She didn't speak. She didn't interfere. But she stood near Pat, tall, still, protective in a way that made something ache deep in Pat's chest. Pat looked at her granddaughter, then exhaled. "No," she told David. "I won't fix what isn't broken." Tara's face reddened, her voice rising into a near scream. "This is absurd! You owe us an explanation." "I don't owe you anything," Pat said softly. David's voice blasted through the speaker, louder than ever. "Mom, I swear. If you think you're making some kind of point—" But Pat was finally done listening to demands. "I'll speak to you soon," she said, calm as sunrise, and she ended the call. Tara stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did not just hang up on him." Pat set the phone down gently on the counter. "I did." Lily stepped closer, sliding her hand into Pat's. Pat gripped it firmly, letting that small gesture steady her. Tara took a step back, stunned. "You've lost your mind," she whispered. "Both of you." She spun toward the door, stumbling slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. But before she stepped outside, she tossed one last look over her shoulder, a look that wasn't just angry, it was afraid. "It's not over," she said, voice thin and shaking. "David's on his way." She slammed the door behind her. Pat and Lily stood in the quiet she left behind, an intense, buzzing silence filled with tension and something darker. Lily swallowed. "Grandma, what's going to happen when he gets here?" Pat looked toward the front window, toward the driveway where headlights would soon appear. Her heartbeat was steady, her jaw set. "We'll find out," she murmured. The headlights hit the living room curtains before the engine even cut off. Bright, harsh, too fast. Lily stiffened beside Pat, her hand still tucked in her grandmother's palm. Pat gave a small squeeze, steadying both of them, then gently let go. "Go sit in the dining room," she murmured, "where you can see me." Lily nodded, eyes wide but determined, and moved quietly to the next room, close enough to hear, close enough to step forward if needed. The front door rattled under a forceful knock, 3 sharp blows full of anger and expectation. Pat opened it. David stood there, jaw clenched, chest rising and falling too quickly. Tara hovered behind him, arms wrapped tightly around herself, the confident edge gone, replaced by something far more fragile. "Mom," David said, pushing inside before she could invite him, "we're not doing this. You need to tell the bank it's a mistake. Now. Pat closed the door, turned, and faced them without a tremor. It's not a mistake. Tara stepped forward, voice cracking. Patricia, this is completely unfair. We've been helping you manage things for years. You can't just accuse us of— I haven't accused you of anything, Pat said quietly. I've simply protected myself. David threw up his hands as if the situation were absurd. Mom, you're confused. You're mixing things up. You're not remembering who paid for what. His tone softened artificially, rehearsed. You've always let me handle the finances. You just aren't seeing it clearly. Behind Pat, Lily's outline shifted, silent, watching. Pat let David's words sit in the air for a moment. Then she walked to the coffee table. She picked up the navy blue binder. Pat's future. She held it the way other people might hold a shield. Actually, she said softly, I'm seeing everything clearly. She opened the binder and set it on the table between them. The pages were perfectly organized, tabs labeled statements, fraud alerts, unauthorized charges, legal transfers. Each page highlighted, dated, notarized, documented. With slow, deliberate hands, Pat turned the binder toward Tara. I want you to look at these. Tara hesitated, eyes darting to David for direction. But David didn't move. He looked like someone suddenly afraid of what he might see. Pat flipped to the first page. A bank statement, months old, yellow highlighter bleeding across a charge after charge after charge. Every withdrawal, Pat said quietly, that I didn't make. She turned the page. Another month. More charges, more yellow marks, more proof. Tara's breath hitched. Her eyes skimmed the page once, twice, and then froze. Her hand pressed to her mouth as if trying to stop the truth from entering her body. This, Tara whispered. No, this can't. But her voice faltered, cracked, fell apart. Pat didn't soften. Not now. You knew, she said. You benefited. And you didn't stop. David finally stepped forward, voice cracking with forced indignation. She's confused. Mom, you can't rely on this. Your memory has been slipping for months. Pat lifted her gaze with a calm that cut right through him. My memory, she said, is fine. David continued, desperate. You're misunderstanding. Those charges, some were gifts, some were family things. I said nothing. Pat interrupted, her tone still soft but impenetrable. Because I didn't know what you were doing. But now I do. She turned another page. Tara flinched again. And this, Pat said, tapping a printed screenshot, is the attempt to link my old card to your online shopping account. Tara went pale. David's mouth fell open, closing again like he was searching for a lie that would fit, but none did. Lily stepped quietly into view then, moving to sit beside Pat on the arm of the sofa. She didn't speak. She didn't glare. She didn't accuse. She just sat there, solid, steady, a silent witness. And it forced David to swallow whatever he'd been about to say. The kitchen suddenly chimed, Pat's laptop lighting up with a new notification. Henry's name appeared at the top of the screen. Pat opened the email. Subject: Confirmation. All protections fully enacted. She read it once, then slowly turned the laptop so David and Tara could see the email header, the official letterhead, the timestamp, the legal confirmation. David's shoulders sagged. Tara's hands trembled. Pat closed the laptop gently. You can't say I'm confused, she said. You can't say I imagined it, and you can't say I didn't give you every chance to tell the truth. No raised voice, no shaking hands, no apology. The truth, spoken simply, was devastating enough. Tara backed up a step, lips trembling. Pat, please. Just let us talk. But the words died in her throat. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. He swallowed hard, fury warring with fear behind his eyes. Pat reached over and placed her hand on Lily's. And Lily held it, firm. "You both need to leave," Pat said quietly. For a moment no one moved. Then Tara turned and hurried out the door, her breath sharp and uneven. David stayed frozen, staring at the binder, as if the truth inside it had stripped him of all his usual defenses. He finally looked at Pat. His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you going to do now?" Pat didn't answer. Behind them, the house was silent enough to hear Lily's steady breaths. And then, Pat's phone buzzed on the table. A text notification from an unknown number. "We know what they did. Call me immediately." The house felt strangely hollow after Tara slipped out into the night. David lingered in the middle of the living room, his shoulders tight, his jaw set hard enough to crack a tooth. Pat stood across from him with the binder at her side, Lily perched quietly at the edge of the sofa, small but steady, a presence that kept the air from tipping into chaos. David finally broke the silence. "Whoever texted you," he said, voice low and bristling, "don't listen to them. They're trying to stir trouble. You need to put a stop to this." Pat's fingers brushed the binder's spine. "David," she said, calm as a slow breath, "you and Tara no longer have access to any of my accounts. Not the old ones, not the new ones, not any legal authority. Everything has been changed." David blinked hard, as if the words themselves were too dense to absorb. "You don't get it," he snapped. "You've made a mess, a huge one. The bank won't tell me anything. Tara can't pay for anything. We have bills. We have things that depend on my accounts?" Pat asked gently. His throat bobbed. "You know what I mean." "No," Pat replied. "I don't think I do." He stepped closer, the frustration almost vibrating off him. "Just undo it. Fix it. This can't stand. You're overreacting to a few mistakes." Pat felt Lily shift behind her. She didn't turn, but she let her presence steady her spine. "David," she said again, voice soft but edged with unmistakable resolve. "The answer is no." He froze mid-step, stunned. She had said no before, but never like that. Not final. Not immovable. "Mom," he warned. "Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything," she said quietly. "I'm ending something that should have ended a long time ago." For a moment, David looked almost lost. Then the familiar indignation fueled him again. "You owe us a chance to—" "I don't owe you anything," Pat said, each word gentle but firm. "I loved you. I trusted you. You used that trust. That's why we're here." The front door suddenly opened, without knocking, and Joan swept inside like a gust of autumn air, clutching a stack of folders to her chest. "Sorry I'm late," she announced briskly. "Traffic was a nightmare, and I had to print some updated forms Henry sent." She stopped when she saw David, her expression cooling instantly. "Oh, he's still here." David looked between them, incredulous. "You brought Joan into this?" "Joan has been helping me for years," Pat said. "You just didn't notice." Joan strode forward and placed the new folders on the table. "Here," she said. "Updated trust summaries, power of attorney confirmations, fraud protections, everything airtight." David's face flushed an angry red. "This is ridiculous. You're manipulating her." Joan raised one eyebrow so sharply it could have cut glass. "Sweetheart, no one manipulates Pat. You just underestimated her." Tara reappeared at the doorway as if dragged back by the weight of the argument. Her eyes were red, her posture defensive. "David," she said, voice shaking. "Let's just go." "No," David said sharply. "Not until—" "David," Tara repeated, stronger this time. "Let's go." He stared at her, stunned. Tara wasn't defending him. She wasn't arguing for their access. She wasn't even glaring at Pat. She looked tired, defeated. "I can't do this right now," Tara whispered. "Let's just leave." David opened his mouth to protest, but Tara had already turned toward the door, wiping at her eyes. Pat watched quietly. No victory, no satisfaction, only a heavy settling of the truth. David looked at Pat one last time, jaw clenched, voice unsteady. "I don't understand you," he said. Pat met his eyes, her voice softening only with honesty. "Someday, I hope you'll understand yourself." Tara pushed the door open. After a long second, David followed. The door closed behind them with a soft click, a sound that felt strangely final. The house exhaled. The walls seemed to settle back into themselves, and Lily, who had been trying to stay small and invisible in the corner, rose and wrapped her arms around Pat's waist. "Grandma," she whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Pat's breath trembled for the first time all evening. She held Lily close, her chin resting on her granddaughter's hair. "You're what matters most," she whispered back. Joan sniffed loudly, pretending to clear her throat. "Well," she said, "that's one mess cleaned up. Maybe now we can—" Before she could finish, Pat's phone buzzed against the table. All three pairs of eyes turned toward it. Another message. From the same unknown number as before. "Call me back. It's urgent." The next morning felt unnaturally quiet, still in a way that made Pat's skin prickle. The unknown message from the night before lingered in her thoughts, but she tucked it aside for now. There was only one storm left to face, and she knew it was coming. Right on cue, a car door slammed outside. Another. Pat stood at the living room window as David and Tara marched up the walkway. Gone was the frantic panic of the night before. Today, they wore something sharper. Controlled, calculated, determined to reclaim ground they thought was theirs. Joan was at the kitchen table, sorting updated forms into Pat's binder. She caught a glimpse of the pair approaching and muttered, "Lord, give me strength," before sliding the binder toward Pat. Lily hovered in the hallway, quiet but alert. Pat nodded to her gently. "I've got this." Lily didn't leave, but she stayed out of sight. A knock. Hard, clipped, impatient. Pat opened the door. David didn't bother with greetings. He pushed past her, Tara close behind, their expressions tight and stormy. "We're talking," David said. "Now." Pat followed them to the living room without rushing. She sat on the sofa, placed the binder on the coffee table, and opened it to the first section. Statements. The papers were arranged neatly, each sheet held in a clear sleeve, highlighted with unwavering precision. David frowned at it like it was a weapon aimed at him. "What's all this supposed to be?" he asked. "Everything you refuse to see," Pat said gently. She slid the first page toward him, then another, and another. Each page was a quiet indictment. Tara crossed her arms tightly. "This is absurd. You're taking normal expenses and turning them into some sort of conspiracy." Pat didn't even look at her. "These are charges I didn't make. Every one of them. And they happened under your access." Tara scoffed, but her voice cracked. "You're twisting this. You're confused. You're trying to make us look—" "I'm not confused," Pat interrupted softly, but firmly. "Not anymore." David leaned in, lowering his voice as though that made his words more reasonable. "Mom, come on. You know things blend together for you. You forget small stuff. You said yourself you didn't always remember every purchase." In the hallway, Lily stiffened but stayed silent. Pat lifted a single page from the binder and placed it in front of him. A fraud alert. Time-stamped, logged, verified. "I remember this," she said, "because it wasn't me." David's jaw ticked. "There has to be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," Pat said. Henry confirmed every withdrawal. every transfer, every attempt to access what never belonged to you. She turned to the next tab. Trust documents. David's eyes widened slightly. Tara's breath hitched. You changed everything? David asked, disbelief cracking through his tone. Yes, Pat said. Everything necessary. Tara stepped forward suddenly, eyes flashing. You're punishing us. This is punishment, and it's cruel. We're your family. We've helped you with so much. You've helped yourselves, Pat corrected. Tara's face flushed red. This is all Joan's doing, she snapped. And that lawyer. They've been filling your head with nonsense because they want control. You're being manipulated. Pat raised a hand, not sharply, but decisively. Stop. Tara froze mid-rant. Pat opened the final section of the binder. Last will and testament. Her name sat at the top in bold lettering. And beneath it, Lily Myers, sole heir. David's breath left him in a ragged exhale. You replaced us? Pat met his eyes steady. Yes. Mom, David said, stepping closer as if proximity could dissolve the truth. You don't mean this. You're upset. You're emotional. You're letting other people get in your head when you should be letting us help you. This is just a phase. Pat's voice didn't rise. It didn't waver. It simply became rooted, quiet but unshakable. Respect, she said, is not optional. Tara made a choked sound, somewhere between outrage and disbelief. She pressed a hand to her forehead, shaking with frustration. This is insane, Tara whispered. You can't do this to us. You can't. We didn't do anything wrong. You're overreacting. You're being impossible. Emotion surged all at once, cracking her composure. Tears spilled down her face, sudden and sharp. David moved to comfort her, but his hands hovered uselessly in the air. His eyes flicked to Pat, searching for softness, old softness, one last chance to turn this around. But Pat didn't bend. Not this time. Lily stepped into the room then, silent and steady, placing a hand on Pat's shoulder. Pat covered it gently. David exhaled shakily. If this is really what you want, then I don't know what to say. Pat closed the binder. Then say nothing. Tara wiped her cheeks, glaring through tears. We'll see about all this, she whispered. We'll see. They turned and left. No slamming door, no parting words. Just the sound of retreat. As their car pulled away, Joan entered from the kitchen, eyes wide. Well, she murmured, that was a whole circus. But Pat barely heard her. Her phone buzzed again. The unknown number. A voicemail this time. She tapped play. A man's voice came through. Calm, steady, unfamiliar. Mrs. Myers, this is Detective Hall with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak as soon as possible. The voicemail from Detective Hall lingered in Pat's mind like a quiet echo she wasn't ready to face. She saved the message and set her phone aside, steadying her breath. There was already enough to confront today. By mid-afternoon, she sat at the dining table with a warm mug of tea and a crisp white envelope placed neatly before her. Inside were the documents Henry had finalized, printed copies of every decision she'd made to reclaim her life. Joan hovered in the kitchen, reviewing a few last pages for the binder. Lily stayed close, moving quietly around the room like a small guardian shadow. Then, the rumble of an engine outside. A door slamming. Then another. Pat didn't flinch. She'd been expecting this. David entered without waiting to be invited, his expression thunderous. Tara followed. Her face pinched, eyes raw from crying or lack of sleep. They stood across from Pat like two people preparing for a verdict they already feared. We need answers, David said sharply. Pat gestured to the chairs opposite her. Sit. Surprisingly, they did. She slid the envelope toward them. Everything you're asking about is in there. David ripped it open, irritation driving every movement. The first document inside was the official revocation of his account access. His jaw tightened. The second listed Tara's complete removal from all accounts. The third confirmed the transfer of all remaining assets into Pat's private accounts. The fourth, her will, sat at the bottom, unmistakable. David held the pages as if they burned. Tara leaned closer, eyes darting across the text. "Patricia, what is this?" "The truth," Pat said. David exhaled sharply. "You didn't need to do this. You're making something small into a disaster." "This wasn't small," Pat replied. Tara shook her head, panic edging her voice. "We've helped you. We've taken care of things. You're twisting everything." "No," Pat said softly. "I'm finally untwisting it." David pressed his palms on the table, leaning forward. "Mom, you can't cut us out like this. You can't make choices like these without us." Pat met his glare with calm certainty. "I can, and I have." His voice cracked with anger. "Fix it." "No." The word landed in the room with quiet force, steady, final. Tara's composure broke. "We didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. "You're upset because of a few charges and now you're throwing away your entire family." Pat's tone didn't change. "I'm protecting myself." David scoffed. "From us? Your own family?" Pat didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Family doesn't take from you and call it help. Family doesn't hide their choices behind your silence. For a moment, Tara stared at the papers in her hands as if they were written in another language. Then she looked at Pat, eyes wide and wet. "You can't be serious." Pat's reply was calm, grounded. "This is my life." Tara's breath broke in a trembling sob. She shoved the papers at David, half standing, half collapsing into motion. "I can't, David, let's go." David hesitated, torn between rage and disbelief, but eventually he stood. He looked at Pat one last time, shaken. "You're making a mistake you can't undo." Pat didn't blink. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Tara hurried toward the door. David followed, slower, pausing just long enough to let his anger show one more time before he walked out. The door shut behind them. Silence swept through the house, not heavy, not fearful, but clean. Lily moved to Pat's side and wrapped her arms around her waist, pressing her cheek against Pat's shoulder. "You're so strong," she whispered. Pat held her close, eyes softening. "I'm learning." Joan approached with the binder, setting it beside the envelope. "Well," she said, "that closes that chapter." Pat started to nod, but her phone buzzed. A text. "Detective Hall. Mrs. Myers, I need to speak with you immediately. It concerns your son." Pat's breath hitched, just slightly. The text from Detective Hall sat on Pat's screen long after she'd read it. "It concerns your son." She saved the message, then locked her phone. Not to avoid it, but to put it where it belonged. Whatever the detective had to say, she wanted one thing finished first. Her future. And Lily's. Henry's office looked different that morning. Not in reality, but in the way Pat saw it. The framed degrees, the careful shelves of legal books, the neat stack of files on his desk, all of it felt less intimidating now. This was no longer the place she came to be rescued. It was the place she came to decide. Henry rose when she entered, offering his usual calm smile. Joan came in right behind her, carrying the navy binder like a ceremonial object. Lily trailed them both, clutching her sketchbook, eyes nervous but bright. "Mrs. Myers," Henry said, "shall we finish what we started?" Pat exhaled softly. "Yes. Let's." They sat around the conference table. Henry slid a new set of documents in front of her, thicker than the last, bound with a blue cover. "This," he said, is your final trust instrument. It supersedes the prior version and locks in the protections we've discussed. Once signed, it's irrevocable. Pat ran her hand over the cover. Irrevocable. There was comfort in that word. Henry opened it to the key page. As we structured it, Lily is your sole beneficiary for the trust assets, retirement accounts, investment funds, and the proceeds of the house upon your passing. No contingent interests for David or Tara. No way for them to inherit through Lily's portion. Joan let out a satisfied little, under her breath. Pat nodded. Good. Henry continued. You also asked for a specific allocation for Lily's first apartment. That's here. He pointed to a section. This creates a dedicated fund that can be used for her security deposit, furniture, and 1 year of rent, provided she's over 18 and enrolled in work or school. You chose Joan as co-trustee with our office. Lily's head snapped up. Grandma, you didn't have to do that. Pat turned to her, eyes warm. I know. I wanted to. Lily blinked fast, shoulders curling inward like she was trying to contain a wave of emotion. Henry went on, voice steady. All distributions will bypass your son and daughter-in-law entirely. They can't redirect them, they can't touch them, and they can't claim them on Lily's behalf. He looked at Pat. This is the most protection the law allows. Pat nodded, the weight of that settling into her bones. For decades, her life had felt like something other people could edit. Not anymore. Henry slid a pen across the table. When you sign, it becomes real. She took the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She signed. On the main page, on the trustee page, on the rider establishing Lily's apartment fund. Each signature felt like a door closing and a window opening. When she finished, Henry gathered the documents with a small, satisfied nod. Congratulations, Mrs. Howe. Myers, you've officially placed your future exactly where you want it. Joan clapped once, then twice, then pulled a small bottle of sparkling cider from the oversized tote bag at her feet. I come prepared, she said. You think I was going to let you lock down your whole life without a toast? She poured 3 plastic cups, one for Pat, one for herself, one for Lily. Henry politely declined, smiling. To Lily's future, Joan said, raising her cup. To Lily's safety, Pat added. Lily swallowed hard. To you, Grandma, she whispered, for not letting them decide everything anymore. They touched cups. The cider fizzed lightly, harmless and festive. Lily moved around the table and wrapped her arms around Pat from the side, holding on longer than usual. Pat leaned her head against Lily's shoulder, letting herself feel the full weight of that embrace, the trust, the gratitude, the love that had nothing to do with money. It's okay, Pat murmured. You don't have to say anything. I'm going to take care of it, Lily said quietly. All of it. When it's my turn. Pat believed her. Later that week, in a different building across town, a clerk at a law office sealed a thick, certified envelope. Inside was the formal notice of disinheritance and trust finalization, copies of the documents David never believed she'd sign. The envelope went into the outgoing mail bin. 2 days after that, David stood at his kitchen counter, ripping it open with impatient fingers. Tara hovered nearby, restless, arms folded tight. He skimmed the headings first, not really reading. Notice of removal as beneficiary. Irrevocable trust confirmation. No legal interest retained. His eyes slowed, then stopped. What does it say? Tara asked. David read the line again, lips moving word by word. There's nothing left, he whispered. Nothing for us. Nothing at all. Tara snatched the papers, scanning them herself, her face drained of color. She really did it, she breathed. She actually did it. Across town, at Pat's kitchen table, Lily laughed at something Joan said, the sound bright and unburdened. Pat's phone buzzed. An email from Henry. All notices delivered and filed. Your plan is fully secure. Pat smiled to herself. The morning sun felt different now. Warmer somehow. As if it had finally stopped filtering through the old fog of worry that used to cling to Pat's days. She stepped out of Joan's car with a stack of pamphlets tucked neatly under her arm, the kind printed in soft blues and greens so they wouldn't scare the seniors who needed them most. The Columbus Community Center buzzed gently with conversation, card games in the back, coffee brewing by the front counter, chairs arranged in a semicircle for the workshop she'd agreed to lead. Pat still found it strange to be the one standing at the front of a room instead of quietly observing from the back. But today, there was no nervous flutter in her chest. Just purpose. Lily walked beside her, sketchbook in hand. "Are you sure you don't want me to help you set up?" she asked. Pat smiled. "You being here is help." She meant it. Lily had grown into a quiet strength these past weeks, the kind that made Pat feel steadier simply by proximity. The seniors filtered in, neighbors she'd known for decades, a few newcomers, one man who seemed to be here only for the free pastries. Pat welcomed each of them with a kind word, her voice gentle but confident. When everyone settled, she stepped to the front. "We're talking about protecting what we've worked for," she began, "and how to make sure we're the ones deciding our own futures." There was no fear in saying it aloud now. The lessons had cost her dearly. Years of silence, years of overlooking, years of shrinking to keep the peace. But sharing them felt like transforming old wounds into something useful. She explained joint account risks. She explained how to read a bank statement. She explained fraud alerts, power of attorney, and how help doesn't always look like help. Heads nodded, pens scribbled, and Lily sketched quietly in the corner, glancing up every few minutes with quiet pride. When the workshop ended, a woman with silver curls pressed Pat's hands between hers. "No one's ever talked to us like this," she said. "Thank you." Pat felt something bloom warm in her chest. Soft, expanding, real. "You're welcome," she whispered. That afternoon, back home, Joan sat up at the dining table like she was preparing for a military operation. Stacks of folders, sticky tabs, protective sleeves, color-coded dividers, her tools of choice. "All right," Joan said, cracking her knuckles. "Operation Legacy Binder begins." Pat laughed softly and took a seat. "Let's do it." Together they organized everything: trust papers, account protections, updated will, insurance files, emergency contacts, letters for Lily, sealed for someday. Joan labeled each tab in her precise accountant handwriting. "This," she declared, sliding the finished binder toward Pat, "is the story of a woman who finally took charge." Pat touched the cover, her fingers gentle. "Thank you." Joan softened. "You did this." "I just held a highlighter." Lily peeked in from the doorway, wiping charcoal dust from her hands. "It looks official." "It is," Pat said, "and it's ours." Later, as the sun dipped low, Pat knelt in her garden. The earth was cool beneath her gloves, rich and fragrant. She dug small holes and lowered delicate seedlings into their beds: lavender, daisies, and bright pink coneflowers that Lily had picked out. The rhythmic motion soothed her, pressing soil, patting it firm, giving each plant room to breathe. This garden had seen years of her life, lean years, lonely years, years where she had watered everything but herself. But today, each bloom felt like a small piece of peace she'd earned. When she stood brushing dirt from her knees, Lily held up her sketchbook. "I drew you," she said shyly. The drawing was soft, gentle, almost glowing. Pat kneeling in the garden, sunlight catching her shoulders, flowers blooming around her. Pat blinked back warmth. It's beautiful. So are you, Lily said simply. That evening, they celebrated with cake. Joan insisted on it. Vanilla with raspberry filling, store-bought but good enough to taste like victory. They ate at the kitchen table, lights dim, the house warm with a rare stillness. Feels peaceful, Joan said between bites. It is peaceful, Pat agreed. For the first time in years. She meant it. Her home felt safe. Her accounts felt secure. Her future felt hers. But just as she lifted her fork for another bite, her phone buzzed on the counter. Not the detective. Not David. A new message. Unknown number. Mrs. Myers, there's something you need to know. It's about the investigation. Pat set down her fork. Slowly. The piece she bought wasn't over. Not just yet. The new message sat on Pat's phone, glowing softly in the dim kitchen light. But unlike last night's unknown number, this one showed a name she hadn't expected to see again. Tara Myers. Pat hesitated only a moment before opening it. The message wasn't long. No anger, no demands, no excuses. Just a quiet, astonishing honesty. Pat, I'm sorry. I didn't see what I'd become. I know we hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to change. Pat exhaled slowly, her thumb hovering above the screen. The apology wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfectly written, but it was real, and strangely, that made it enough. She read the message one final time, then walked to the hallway cabinet where she kept important documents and private memories. From the bottom drawer, she took out the simple folder she'd labeled last night in careful handwriting. Past, she opened it and placed Tara's message inside. No ceremony, no bitterness, just placement, where it belonged. As she slid the folder closed, she felt Lily appear at her shoulder, quiet as always. Is everything okay? Lily asked gently. Pat turned to her granddaughter. Lily looked steadier these days. Still soft, still kind, but with a confidence rising beneath the surface, like roots taking hold. Pat reached out and took her hand. Everything's exactly where it should be. Lily's face warmed, a smile blooming slowly. Good. Together they walked to the kitchen. The evening light stretched across the floor in warm streaks as Pat filled her favorite mug, the one with faded violets painted along the rim, and carried it toward the porch. Lily followed her to the door but didn't step outside, choosing instead to linger in the frame like a quiet guardian. Pat eased into her porch chair, the wood familiar beneath her. The air smelled like damp earth and late summer leaves. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, and a sprinkler clicked rhythmically in the neighbor's yard. Simple sounds. Ordinary sounds. But they felt richer now. She lifted her tea and took a slow sip, letting the warmth fill her chest. With her free hand, she opened the worn leather journal she'd kept for years, the one filled with gentle entries and hesitant hopes, always written around the life she thought she had to endure. Tonight, she wrote about the life she'd chosen. She let the pen glide steady and sure across the page. Respect protects peace. The truth of it settled deep within her. For decades, she'd mistaken politeness for respect. For years, she'd confused silence with harmony. And for too long, she'd believed love meant giving everything, even when nothing came back. But peace, real peace, required boundaries. And she had built them, brick by brick, document by document, choice by choice. She closed the journal with a soft thud and set it on the small table beside her. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm glow across the steps. Lily stepped outside then, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "Grandma," she said softly, "can I sit with you?" Pat smiled. "Always." Lily curled into the chair beside her, head resting lightly against Pat's arm. The evening thickened into a gentle blue, the kind of dusk that didn't feel like an ending at all. more like a beginning. After a long, comfortable silence, Lily murmured, "Do you feel better now?" Pat thought for a moment. Then she nodded. "I feel free." Lily squeezed her arm. They stayed like that, still, present, safe, until the fireflies began to flicker across the yard and the air cooled against their cheeks. Finally, Pat looked out across the quiet street, lifted her mug, and spoke the truth she had carried all the way to this final moment. "He sent me chocolates with my own money," she said softly, almost to herself. "So I gave them away and reclaimed everything that mattered." The night settled around them, calm, deserved, whole.